Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. And today, I'm so happy to have Jessica Strawser with us. And let me tell you a little bit about Jessica, and then I'll tell you about my connection with her. She's editor-at-large at Writer's Digest and the USA Today best-selling author of suspenseful book club novels, including Almost Missed You, Not That I Could Tell, a Book of the Month pick, A Million Reasons Why, The Next Thing You Know, a People magazine pick, and her latest, The Last Caretaker, an instant USA Today bestseller. Her 7th novel, Catch You Later, is forthcoming October 22, 2024. She has written for the New York Times, Modern Love, Publishers Weekly, and other fine venues, and is a popular writing instructor and freelance editor specializing in helping writers with their submission packages. She lives with her husband and children in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she was named 2019 Writer in Residence for the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County, and awarded an Ohio Arts Council Individual Excellence Award for 2024. Welcome, Jessica. So great to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And so we've known each other through our connection with Writer's Digest. You were once an editor there. I don't think I worked with you when you were editor, but I've seen you at the different writing conferences. And most recently, we were both at the Irma Bombeck conference. I have not been a big mystery novel person, but that has all changed since I read your book. So everyone has a high bar to adhere to. So The Last Caretaker really just grabbed me by the throat and pulled me along. And what impressed me with it is I feel that a lot of books that are maybe even mystery novels from when I used to read give these very obvious tells. And I felt like yours was very subtle. And I know that that's craft. That's craft in action. So craft always impresses me. And reading through, I have so many questions. So why don't we start from the very beginning? What prompted you to come up with the idea for and write this mystery novel?
And I am so intimidated by how many Post-its you had in that copy that you held up. That is a lot. That is, everyone on the podcast can't see it, but there are quite a lot. I feel like I'm in for a pop quiz on my own book, but thank you so much for the kind words, first of all, and for reading so thoroughly. And every time I do see you at a conference, we always say, oh, I wish we had a chance to talk more. And now we do. So there was kind of a part A and a part B for how I came up with the idea. So the more obvious is that there really is so I guess I should tell anyone who hasn't read it, The Last Caretaker is about a woman who accepts a job as a resident caretaker at a nature reserve in the middle of nowhere. And she's just kind of looking to start over after her divorce. And she's not even sure if she is going to like living by herself in the middle of nowhere. But a friend pulls some strings to get her this job, says, you know, it comes with a fully furnished farmhouse. It's a perfect place to start over. So why not fake it till you make it? But she very quickly finds out that caretaking involves more than she bargained for. And her predecessor in this job was maintaining a safe house on this property that helps women on the run from abusive men. And she has to decide if she wants to step into this role And part of what's driving this decision is the fact that no one seems to know what happened to the last caretaker. So I had the idea for this novel hiking at a nature reserve near my house that I fictionalized it for the book because there really is a caretaker there. And I didn't want anyone to go out there and harass this person. But as a woman and a writer who likes to kind of think of my ideas, do a little brainstorming out in nature, maybe at off peak times when not a lot of other people are out there, I choose this particular nature reserve because you have to be a member of the Cincinnati Nature Center to hike there. There's an unmanned gate. You have to swipe a membership card to get in, and really anyone could walk in, but it would take some effort. It's in the middle of nowhere. So I just always felt a little safer going there, knowing that someone's at least keeping track of ostensibly who's coming in and who's coming out. And as women, that's always on our minds, right? Whether we're safe going somewhere, and especially if it's a remote area. And I was thinking about, I would always see the caretaker's house through the trees and wonder what it would be like to be out all by yourself out there. And I always thought of that as being kind of a chicken myself. I always thought of that as kind of an unnerving way, could I do it? This would be fun for maybe a week or two, but would I really want to live out here permanently? And then one day something just flipped in my head, and I thought it would be really interesting if that person was someone who saw this as an opportunity, an empowering opportunity to be the master of her own domain. And it wouldn't be all by myself out here and nobody knows what's going on, but I'm all by myself out here and nobody knows what's going on.
Wow. And so it's a mystery, and there's several mysteries wrapped up. It's what happened to the last caretaker, it's what's going on. The through line, or a big important thread, is domestic violence, without giving anything too much away. And that is something that you are very familiar with writing, because you had a friend who was sadly a victim of domestic violence, and you wrote a New York Times modern love about it called An Extra Angel on Top of the Tree back in 2014.
Yes.
So,
and I
yeah.
actually also wrote another novel that touched on domestic violence, which, when I said it was kind of a two-part answer to that question, you just hit on the other part, which is this is an issue that's kind of always on my mind and has been very dear to me since I did lose a friend. Being a journalist, I didn't really know anything about it, and I kind of set out to learn what I could and try to make some sense of what had happened. And through that, I ended up doing a lot of volunteer work with our local YWCA. I helped with their public awareness campaign one year for Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is October. We all think of it as breast cancer awareness and the little pink ribbons, but sometimes if you see someone wearing a little purple ribbon the same month, that is for domestic violence awareness. And so I wrote another novel called Not That I Could Tell in 2018 that touched on this a little bit. I never want to write about it in a heavy-handed way. No one's going to say, you should read this novel about domestic violence. That sounds heavy. So for me, it's more of I'm going to tell you a really entertaining, relatable story that is maybe, and this is whether I'm writing about domestic violence or anything else serious, because I think that's why my books get shelved as book club fiction, because they give you, hopefully, a lot to talk about. So there might be a surface mystery, but usually there's some kind of deeper issue or moral dilemma. So I had written another novel that touched on this, and that novel was really successful and was embraced by book clubs, and a lot of them would invite me to join their discussions. And so I had written that novel because I knew how common domestic violence actually is, even though it's kind of treated with a certain stigma, like it's something that happens to other people. So I wrote the novel because I knew how common it was, and then I found out how common it was. So I was invited into all of these book club meetings, and people would share their stories, things that had happened to them, things that had happened to their friends. And I'm sitting with women in their living rooms and around their kitchen tables, and everyone's crying. And I was at one book club where they had hidden one of their own members in the house we were in from her ex-husband for like a month because he kept walking through a restraining order. And they would always ask, are you thinking about writing a sequel to Not That I Could Tell? Which I'm not really, I don't know if I'm a sequel kind of person, but I'm a never say never kind of person. So I kind of had in the back of my mind that gosh, maybe I do have something more to say on this issue, and something I really would have liked to write about again, but I wasn't sure how to do it. And then when I came up with the idea for The Last Caretaker, it was this way to kind of return to a subject that I'd already thought a lot about, but in a much more empowering way, and in a way that I hope kind of honors and celebrates the stories that so many readers have been open enough to share with me over the
So
years.
it sounds like your background with the groups and the domestic violence, that was sort of like research for the book. It was research for your first novel about it. And then this had a more empowering feeling to it that you wanted to give it. But it's still that you have that knowledge, that visceral understanding. I mean, it's fictionalized, but it's based in your own experiences, not your own personal experiences.
Exactly. No, I think, once it's the research that you don't even know that you're doing, you're just collecting all of these experiences, and it kind of starts to gel into something else. I think it's interesting when I say, oh, this woman stumbles into what happens is Katie, the woman who accepts the job as caretaker, her very first night, this isn't a spoiler, her very first night on the job, a woman in distress shows up at her door, and she has a little card that says, go to the caretaker's house and the caretaker will know what to do. And the caretaker does not know what to do. And, she's quickly putting together that there's something very organized here, that she is a step in a very organized, very thoughtful kind of underground network, which immediately raises a red flag because they're so organized and they're so careful that the fact that they would let her stumble into this position without knowing what's going on seems very wrong. It seems to her that something has gone terribly wrong with this network. And if you do any kind of volunteer work relating to, helping women in need, whether it's with a hotline or a shelter, one of the first things you find out is that there is a level of trust and secrecy, even if you go through traditional channels to get help. If you volunteer at the shelter even for the YWCA, they're not going to give you a street address to go to the shelter. The directions you get are much more drive until you see this, then turn left. They're putting a lot of trust in you, and everything is kind of done under a veil of maybe not secrecy, but discretion, certainly. So whenever I say it's a book about someone who stumbles into this underground network to help domestic violence victims, nobody, not one person, has ever said, why would there need to be an underground network to help domestic violence victims? We all know that the traditional system doesn't do the best job of protecting people who find themselves in a dangerous situation.
So there's this element of advocacy, but it's really a story. It's storytelling and just takes you on a journey. And I want to get a little bit more granular now. So you have multiple characters throughout the novel, but there's only really one POV from Katie, the caretaker, the one that comes after the last one. I guess she could be considered the last one too.
The new one.
Yeah, the new one, the new caretaker.
The clueless caretaker.
Now, it could have been very easy to have done it from the point of view of Jude or Bess, but this was a decision because when we're writing, we're making decisions all the time. Maybe in the first draft, people do that, but as you're crafting something, so you made a decision to do the POV from Katie's point of view and only Katie's point of view. And what informed that decision?
It's funny that you mentioned that because all of my other novels have been told from multiple points of view. This is the only one that was one. And originally, I did have multiple points of view in this novel. And my editor really challenged me to bring it to just Katie's point of view, which I think was the right decision. I originally had two other points of view. I had Bess, who is the friend who hired Katie to do the job, who's a naturalist at the main nature center, but doesn't work at this annex property very often. And then I also had someone who you weren't really sure who they were. There were just these little snippets of somebody watching Katie through the woods. And it was really unsettling knowing that she thought she was alone out there, but someone was actually watching what she was doing. But I didn't have very many of those chapters. The bulk of the story was very much through Katie's experience because it really is her story. She's this every woman I love to write about characters who are put to the test and who are about to find out that they are stronger than they knew. And that is very much Katie's story. She's kind of this every woman. She's the only person involved in this network who didn't have some kind of personal reason for becoming involved.
She didn't have a great romantic relationship.
I think that's part of it. She finds these parallels between herself and the women coming through. She went there to start over, to try to start fresh, to try to forget, her failed marriage and this whole life that she's left behind. And the women coming through are also trying to start over, but with much higher stakes, with their lives at risk. And I think it was very much Katie's story, and it was better, I think, for it to be limited to what she knew, because she really is trying to piece together what's happening out there. But I think my initial hesitation was just that she is a woman alone on a nature reserve. And I didn't know if she could carry, an entire novel by herself. But I think it turned out that she could. And one reviewer pointed out, like, I thought this would be about this woman who's alone, but she's actually almost never alone. There's usually someone in her secret loft, or she's trying to make sense of, what to make of someone who's on the property, or
Okay, so I want to boil down to like some Easter eggs. So what I feel you did when I'm looking at breaking it down in an analytical way, I feel like each ending of a chapter, you kind of took the reader by the hand and like brought them along with you in some way, whether it in Katie's mind, whether it's like her thought process or some way. So for example, on page 22, couldn't we just put a sign in them that says no climbing? This is Katie saying it. Jude blinked slowly, which she had the feeling might be as close as he came to laughing. Katie thought of the words marking her own driveway: private, caretaker's residence, keep out. Before he even answered her question, goosebumps rose on her arms. First thing you'll learn out here, he said, nobody ever listens to a sign. Wow. So that makes you think, oh, who's not listening to a sign? Who's the danger? But it's a great way to end the chapter because you're moving forward. It's a device that moves the plot forward. Another example. So you're ending with like Katie's frustration or something blocking her, or, on this quest, or on this, what she's doing with this caretaker role. For example, on page 73, at least here she could keep an eye on him. If Jude was with her, he wasn't poking around somewhere else. Teamwork, she agreed. Despite everything, she almost wished he were on her team after all. She didn't know yet if anyone else really was. Again, it's like, oh no, what's going to happen? Who's against her? How are they acting against her? And then on page 178, Katie smiled guiltily. I thought you'd want to know she hasn't logged on to see your wedding invite. I know everyone is convinced she's fine, but Gina didn't smile back. Instead, with one defiant question, she turned Katie's blood cold. Who said I'm convinced she's fine? So again, this is how you ended. So this was conscious decisions. Talk to me about like some of these devices that you also use the device of time, a countdown to Katie's sister coming with her kids, and that Katie had to kind of hide all the elements of what she's doing. How did you make decisions to use these devices in the book?
Ending the chapters with either, not always necessarily a cliffhanger, just some kind of emotional beat, whether it's a clue or a realization or kind of a sinking feeling, is something that I'm really strict about. A chapter never just ends. Like, I'm at the end of a scene and I guess I'll just turn the page and start the next. And sometimes I will stare at the last page of a chapter for like an entire day until I get it right. I think it's almost as much, I know that it has, hopefully an effect on the reader to make them want to keep reading. And this is a suspense genre. So the number one thing is you want them to still be in suspense at the end of, each scene. But I think a lot of it is, for me too, as a writer, from a craft standpoint, like, what was the point of this scene? What is the takeaway, or what has just shifted or changed for this character? And with Katie, something is always shifting for her. She's really deciding what to make of whether or not she wants to rise to the challenge and what to make of her situation out there. So in her case, I think it was extra important. And then the device you mentioned with the time, I think, yeah, she just kind of enters this. Well, from the beginning, she feels sort of obligated to step into this role, at least temporarily, just because she knows that if she doesn't, these women will have no place else to go. So it could have been this indefinite situation where she's just kind of doing this on a trial basis and everybody figures out, waits and see. And I think in real life, when things are indefinite, sometimes they drag on for too long and there's not that sense of urgency. And so for Katie, I wanted there to very much be a sense of urgency, which is that she has told her sister that her sister's kids can come out there for the summer while her sister is finishing getting her master's. Her sister's a single mom. She's finishing getting her master's. And she's like, oh, yeah, the kids can come have the run of this nature preserve this summer. We'll call it Camp Aunt Katie, and they can be out here with me. So she has this hanging over her head. If I cannot have these kids out here if I don't know that it's safe out here. It raises, in addition to putting this timeline on it, it also raises the stakes because it's not necessarily in her hands. Like, yes, she needs to make some kind of decision before they come, but also it might not be up to her whether she's safe out there.
Right. And it comes in the middle. It doesn't really come in the beginning of the book. I think it comes in what I think Hank Ryan Felipe calls it the messy middle.
Messy middle. I think we all call it that. I call it the muddle in the middle sometimes.
The muddle in the middle. I like that. The muddle in the middle.
I think and it's also just part of Katie's own journey. She was trying to start over on her own terms, and then things quickly have spiraled out of control with caretaking involving things that she did not bargain for. But one of the things that it's important that she not lose sight of her original goals, which were, I've been in this failing marriage. I have neglected other things in my life that I wanted to pay more attention to. And one of those things was her relationship with her sister. It's really important to her to repair this relationship. She feels like she's been really wrapped up in her own problems. And she went there with the goal of being able to be there for her sister. And it means a lot to her. And it's not something that she feels like she can cancel.
And that becomes even more important later on in the climax of the book, which I'm not going to mention. But it's like you keep raising the stakes. Are there other plot devices that you use that help craft the book and build to the transformation of Katie? And really the transformation, I think, of all the characters, maybe not the villains, but all the characters.
I don't look at the characters in a bubble. I also look at their relationships. So I think one of the things that her friend Bess is trying to do her this favor by pulling some strings to get her this job. And Bess thought this was her area of expertise. Like, I got you. You're coming here. You're not really qualified, but I'll help you, and this is going to be great. And Katie's immediately like, did you know this was going on? And Bess did not know that it was going on. So it kind of shifts the power dynamic in their relationship right away, where Bess thought she was going to be kind of just guiding Katie through this experience. And instead it's challenging their relationship, because once Katie tells her and finds out Bess didn't know, she also realizes, well, the previous caretaker didn't trust Bess enough with this information, or wasn't allowed to tell anybody. And now I've already told her. So, I'm not really supposed to be sharing this. So they all have their own kind of personal growth and things they're being challenged on, but also the relationships, I think, are really important. And when I look at characters and how they're all going to play into the plot, I try not to think about any one person in a bubble, but also how these dynamics are going to shift. So yeah, you've got the sister's kids, you've got a relationship with her friend, there's a handyman on the property who's always there, which is not as handy as it might sound, although Katie actually needs help, but she's scared to have him around because she's scared he's going to discover the woman hiding in her barn at any given moment. And then the dynamics between Katie and this network, she's trying to piece together who's in it, and she doesn't even know for sure that they're the good guys, because she doesn't know what happened to her predecessor. And so she doesn't know whether to trust them, and they don't know whether to trust her. So especially in a suspenseful novel, if you can bring out the tension in any relationship, which every relationship has tension, and in a way that is endemic to the plot, that's probably another device that I pay a lot of attention to.
And do you do that with dialogue primarily, or inner thoughts? I mean, you have a lot of like italicized inner thoughts throughout.
Yeah, that's the whole woman on the woman alone in the wilderness thing. And I should say the women in the barn too. I think a lot of it is through dialogue. Katie does a lot of processing. There's kind of these downbeats, and but she has these tense exchanges, whether it's with the bleeding woman on her doorstep or someone who she doesn't know if they belong on the property or not, or if they're there for nefarious reasons. And there's a lot of like heated exchanges, and then she's often processing in between. And I love the idea that, setting this in this nature reserve, there's a lot of talk about how it's going through seasons. She shows up at the very beginning of spring. There's actually a really early snowstorm right after she gets there. And then it goes into summer where the mosquitoes are taking over and everything's in full bloom. And the nature reserve's kind of going through seasons, sort of the way Katie is going through seasons. And I think it was easy to find a lot of metaphors in that as well. But my initial idea for setting in nature really was the idea that, I think a lot of people, I don't want to say just women, because not all domestic violence victims are women, but a lot of people, when they find themselves in a situation seeking help, they really end up taking what they can get. And there's not anything especially, glamorous, or a women's shelter is not the best place to be, even if you're in a really nice one, just by virtue of what it is. So the idea that this is set up on this nature reserve because it's like this peaceful stopping point on these women's journey. These are women who have already decided to leave their lives behind, assume a new identity, escape, start over, go somewhere else. And then they have this like peaceful, beautiful stopping place. The idea that they deserve better. It's like when the gates close for the day, you're welcome to walk around and sit by the pond. I liked the idea that it was kind of set up.
It really shows that each sentence just moves the story forward. There's no dead wood, to use a nature term. So, in terms of the writing, in terms of your own process, do you outline this before you write, or are you just letting it come to you as you write? I'm just very curious because you're so prolific in the work that you do, and you're an editor at large for Writer's Digest, which we'll talk about separately. Yeah.
I think I'm more of a pantser who wishes I was a plotter. Definitely my outlining is not something that I do. I still do not outline, but planning out a whole story in advance is not something that comes naturally to me. But as you said, if you are trying to publish at a certain pace, for me, it's been about a book a year, you do have to think out the story first. At least my publishers have made me think about it first. You have to kind of have a synopsis to get it green lighted before you write the story. So I've really had to kind of learn to, I think of it not in terms of an outline at all, but I have learned to kind of think ahead in terms of an arc, maybe a plot twist that I'm working towards, certain beats. I usually know how a story is going to end, but not necessarily how I'm going to get there.
And so it evolves, like the characters kind of speak to you as you're writing, that kind of thing?
Kind of, which sounds so woo-woo. And I don't know, after my first couple novels, I think with everything but the first 2 or 3, I've had to do a full synopsis before I wrote. And I've had a lot of author friends say, oh yeah, I turned in that full synopsis and then I just wrote something completely different. And it worked out. I will say, through whatever madness, usually when I write that synopsis, it will be as undetailed as possible. Really does focus on the arc and not how I'm getting there. But for the most part, I've never gone off the rails on that. I have had books where I didn't know for sure how one thing about it was going to resolve, but I've never had characters like speak to me in a way that derailed my whole original plan. It's more like filling in color. Say you're going to paint a picture of mountainscape, but you don't really know what color it's going to be or anything until you start painting.
I love hearing the process. I think it's so interesting, especially because you are so prolific, a book a year, plus being editor at large for Writer's Digest. I'm a contributing editor there now, and I did the All About the Pitch column, and I've been teaching for 8 years, I think now. Tell me a little bit about your role as editor at large for Writer's Digest.
I think at first it was more of at first I was doing a lot of consulting and was still doing some editorial work in the interim when I first left. It was a difficult decision to leave Writer's Digest, but I had signed my third novel contract. And I worried that people would think it looked like this boldly confident move. Like, oh, now I've published 2 novels, so I'm just going to go be a novelist now. And that wasn't it at all. It was more, I had 2 really young kids. They're in elementary school now, but at the time they were toddlers, preschoolers. And I was working full time as editorial director at the magazine. And I signed my contract for my third novel, and they were really pushing me on what the deadline was going to
Yeah,
be.
I just want to mention you were editor-in-chief of
I
Writer's
was editor-in-chief.
Digest
Yeah.
in the mid 2000s, right? So
Yes, I think I left in 2018. Yeah. So, and I was editor-in-chief, and then I was actually editorial director for a while. So I was chief editor of the magazine, and I was also programming their conference and doing a lot of other things. And so it was more than a full-time job. And then when I first started writing novels, I would do it when my kids were asleep for as long as I could keep my eyes open. And it was like a little me time, a little creative time at the end of the day. And then it was turning into something else. And I wasn't getting any sleep at all. And I just felt like I wasn't doing anything well. So I made the decision to step away from the magazine. And so at first I was doing a lot of editorial work, like just not in the office and consulting and things like that. And over the years, it's really evolved. Sometimes I'm more involved than others. I have a column called Learn by Example in the magazine that I curate, and I'm here when they need me. Sometimes they call me to do something. Sometimes I pitch them to do something. And
that's great. So we don't have that much more time left, but can you share some actionable writing tips if somebody's saying, okay, I want to try write a mystery novel now, like maybe because you teach also.
The biggest tip is to take advantage of the resources that are available to you, which if they're listening to this, they probably already are. But I think if one good thing came out of COVID is that so many things are virtual now. So many things that you couldn't attend before unless you had a certain amount of money or vacation time or travel budget or the time to go do it. So many things are accessible now, no matter where you are. And that's made it so that there really is no excuse for doing your homework. But it's also the information is there if you need it. So, find a writing instructor who speaks to you, someone whose voice you like. You were asking about plotting versus outlining. No matter what your approach is, there's going to be a writing instructor who resonates with you and who can help. If you're someone like me who has a hard time, like who doesn't even really desire to outline a book, I highly recommend Stephen James's writing guides. He has one called Story Trumps Structure, and he just he calls it organic storytelling. There's a method to it, but it's not this regimented outlining method. So be persistent. So many people get frustrated. I think people think rejection ends once you get published for the first time, and that's unfortunately not true. It never ends. So you have to be really persistent, and I guess bullheaded but flexible. Maybe that's my third tip. So, bullheaded, but also if somebody is giving you feedback and you can kind of feel in your gut that they're probably right, then you should take it.
And what about writing on the sentence level?
It's actually good to end when you know what comes next and not end when you're stuck. I'm a big believer in forward momentum, just like sitting down at the keyboard multiple days in a row. So if you are in a scene and you're nearing the end of the scene, but you know what comes next, that's a great place to end. Writing until you don't know what happens next is a bad place to end, because then you might not come back to it because you're thinking, oh gosh, I have to start again, but I don't know where to start. But when you're starting again and it's, oh yeah, I just have to finish that one scene that I already thought through. I already know exactly what happens next. And it's much easier to get back to it. You can kind of trick yourself into getting back into it.
And what about a tip for starting a new chapter? Like, do you do it in any kind of particular way?
Just start, and you can rewrite it later. Sometimes I get hung up on the best way to start it, which isn't, sometimes it's like, just write what happens. Even if you can't figure out the scene, like you can literally just write almost a note to yourself. This is what happens in this chapter. And sometimes if you just do that, kind of like starting a workout, if you tell yourself, if I just do it for 5 minutes, and then if I don't feel like doing it anymore, I can stop. But usually once you're 5 minutes in, you do feel like still going.
Do you personally write every day?
Not 7 days a week, but 5 days a week.
That's great. And you have another book coming out, which we mentioned before, and it has a beautiful cover. And you'll have to come back on the program to talk about your next book, which I'm really excited to
I
read.
would love to. Yes, it's called Catch You Later, and it comes out in October. It is another mystery, but also gives you some deeper things to think about. And I'm really excited about it.
This is so exciting. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. And I know that my audience is going to find everything you said so valuable. And again, The Last Caretaker, such a fascinating and fast read. It really is. It's actually a great beach read too, I think.
Yay, I hope so. Thank you very much. Kind of aspirational, right? If you've ever thought about what it would be like to be someplace beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover as well with these are dandelions, right? Or daisies.
They're black-eyed Susans, which
Oh,
actually
they're black-eyed Susans. Look at that.
factor into the story. So I love covers like that where you just think it's pretty and then you're halfway through reading it and you realize, oh,
This is an important, like a plot device in a way, right? Oh, I love that. Okay. We'll add that to the list of plot devices to use the cover. Well, thank you so much again, Jessica.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.